Sometimes the people who can be the most brutal aren't strangers at all. They're the ones closest to you. That's why, in murder cases, police almost always start with family. On the morning of April 29, 2023, an emergency call came into a police station in Rostov. On the other end of the line was a woman, screaming, crying, begging for help. She said, "A man broke into our apartment. He threatened me. I tried to stop him, and he sprayed pepper spray straight into my face. I lost consciousness, and when I woke up, my 8-month-old daughter was gone. She disappeared." Police were sent to the apartment immediately, but the moment they walked inside, even seasoned investigators felt sick. At that point, no one yet knew what had really happened in this nightmare. This case is genuinely disturbing. Even for me, going through the documents and details was hard. So if you make it to the end and leave a like, or even a comment, it honestly means a lot. The woman who made that call was Anastasia Cherednichenko. She was born on March 22, 2000, in the Stavropol region. People who knew her growing up said she'd always been different. She was a good student, outgoing, social, but there was always something about her. Once she made up her mind, it was almost impossible to change it. She hated living in her hometown. She kept saying she wanted to move to a big city, study medicine, become a nurse. And eventually she did. After high school, she enrolled at Rostov State Medical University in pediatrics. She studied there and completed her internship at a local clinic in the Suvorovsky district. By then, she had already moved permanently to Rostov-on-Don. In February 2020, Anastasia met a man named Yakov. He was 10 years older than her, but the age gap didn't seem to matter. They started dating, and just a few months later, they moved in together. Yakov was working and making decent money, so he rented an apartment in the city center for the two of them. Yakov Moyborodov was born in a small village. Growing up, he was deeply into sports and planned to build his entire life around it. But an injury put an end to that, and after that, his family discouraged him from continuing. People described him as ambitious and determined. After school, he studied management and later worked as a sales manager at a company in Rostov. He was good at it, but eventually sales bored him. He switched to real estate. A few years later, he decided to start his own business. In January 2022, Yakov learned that Anastasia was pregnant. The baby wasn't planned, but they didn't panic. They took the news calmly. Even after the child was born, they never planned to officially get married. In June 2022, Anastasia finished her 5th semester and took an academic leave to give birth. In September, their daughter was born. A few days later, Anastasia was discharged from the hospital. Yakov came to pick them up with a huge bouquet of flowers and a toy. In that moment, everything looked like the beginning of a happy family. But less than 2 months later, their life turned into hell. Yakov's business wasn't going anywhere. He didn't have stable work. Their savings kept shrinking. Eventually, they sat down and talked it through. They decided Anastasia would go back to work, and they'd hire a nanny to take care of the baby. They did find a nanny. Her name was Luba. The problem was, they didn't actually have enough money to pay her. So instead, they decided to scam her. Later on, Luba even wrote about this family on social media. She said Anastasia and Yakov would hire nannies, pay them for about a week, and then come up with a story so they wouldn't have to pay anymore. Luba called them dangerous, unstable. According to her, the pattern was always the same. They'd pay for a week. Then Anastasia would start crying, saying her husband had left her, that she had no money, that she was desperate, and she'd play on people's emotions. And part of that wasn't even an act. Yakov really did leave often. He would disappear for days, sometimes weeks. Luba described him as aggressive and unpredictable. She said that a couple of times, when she asked to be paid, Yakov came at her and started a fight. She said Yakov constantly fought with Anastasia. He could be gone for weeks. Then every few days he'd show up, play with the baby for a bit, argue with his wife, and leave again. She also said that sometimes Yakov himself would call Child Protective Services and file complaints against his own wife. Luba remembered one moment clearly. She said Yakov suddenly slammed the door and left. Anastasia sat down and started crying, complaining about him. Luba tried to comfort her. She told her, "Live for your daughter." But somehow, this toxic dynamic worked for them. After every huge fight, they'd reconcile. And then everything would start all over again. In November 2022, they moved to the Suvorovsky district of Rostov and rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the 16th floor. New neighbors said nothing had changed. There were still constant fights, breakups, and sometimes even physical violence. They didn't have close friends. Too many moves, too many problems. Life went on like that until early 2023, when Anastasia was fired. She was caught stealing cosmetics from the store where she worked. And once again, the money problems exploded. Luba said, "I was afraid of Yakov. He was unhinged. A few times, he nearly attacked me and constantly insulted me. Then, starting in February, they stopped paying. I had to ask my husband to call him. Only after that did they transfer the money." She also said she had a strong feeling that working for this family wouldn't end well. When they no longer had a nanny and couldn't find another one, all responsibility for the baby fell on Anastasia. And it was around that time that a strange, growing anger toward the child seemed to appear. The baby cried constantly, and they couldn't calm her down. And often, the only thing louder than the baby's crying was the parents screaming. Yakov kept saying Anastasia was a bad mother. But he didn't step in to help. Then came April 28th. Another argument. This one was different. This one smelled like blood. The reason was jealousy and suspected infidelity. Yakov believed Anastasia was still in contact with a former coworker. According to him, that man had a close relationship with his wife. Later, during interrogation, Anastasia said something that stops you cold. She said, "I was holding the baby. My husband was yelling. Then he became aggressive, waving his arms, kicking. He hit us. It seemed accidental. The baby fell. She started having seizures. I put her on the bed. I'm a medical professional. I realized it was over. She couldn't be saved. And so she wouldn't suffer. I covered her with a pillow until she stopped breathing." They knew exactly what that meant. Prison. So they decided to erase the evidence. But what they did next was even more horrifying. I can't describe everything in detail here. YouTube won't allow it. I'll just say this. They took the body to the kitchen and tried to get rid of it. Some of what remained was put in the freezer. They planned to bury it a few days later. According to Yakov, the idea to call the police and invent the unknown man story came from Anastasia. That same night, neighbors became suspicious. That apartment was usually loud. Baby crying, shouting, fighting. But that night, absolute silence. One neighbor said, "It was like everyone inside that apartment had suddenly died." When Anastasia and Yakov realized people would notice sooner or later, they decided to act first. They called the police themselves. Anastasia repeated the same story on the phone. Someone knocked. She looked through the peephole and saw a man. She thought it was her husband. She opened the door. The man rushed in, sprayed her. She passed out. Hours later, she woke up, and the baby was gone. The officers who arrived immediately sensed something wasn't right. Anastasia played the role of a worried mother well. But not for long. Police searched the apartment and spoke to neighbors. And because neighbors described constant fighting, officers searched more thoroughly. About 20 minutes later, they found something that's hard to even process. In the freezer, they found the baby's remains. There were blood traces in the apartment. In the kitchen, knives, an axe, and an electric meat grinder with tissue traces. The remains were removed in 13 bags. According to their initial statements, they planned to take everything out after police left and bury it in a nearby wooded area. Anastasia believed it would be classified as a missing child case, and that would be the end of it. Both parents were arrested immediately. Anastasia was detained inside the apartment. Yakov was arrested outside. The charge was murder. Forensic experts determined the baby died from asphyxiation. And the most tragic part? They said the child could have been saved after the fall, but the parents chose to end it. During questioning, they admitted they had argued that day. Yakov said Anastasia was a bad mother and accused her of cheating. He admitted that in moments of rage he sometimes hit her. That day he kicked, aiming at Anastasia but missed. The baby took the full blow. Neighbors later said that in those high-rise buildings, sound travels. There's no way people didn't hear the crying and the fights. They heard it. They were just afraid to step inside. Afterward, residents created a memorial at the building entrance, flowers and toys for the little girl. Opinions about the couple were split. Some said they seemed normal. Others said they constantly fought and beat each other. It also came out that Child Protective Services had visited multiple times, because Yakov himself had called them. One neighbor said Anastasia was afraid of her husband and sometimes ran out of the apartment with the baby when Yakov wasn't acting normal. Many people said they must be insane. But one thing is clear, because they tried to cover it up, they knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't act out of madness. They acted out of fear of prison. Psychiatric evaluations confirmed both were mentally competent. First, both confessed. But as the investigation continued, they started blaming each other. Anastasia's final version was this. She said she was in the shower when Yakov strangled the baby. When she came back, the baby was under a blanket. Her face looked unnatural. There were small spots on her face and a mark on her neck. She said she asked him why he did it. He didn't answer. He told her she had to help him, or he'd kill her too. He said he needed to be seen on city cameras to create an alibi, and that he would come back. She said he took her phone and her keys and left. She claimed she was in shock and tried to calm herself with medication. Later, she said Yakov returned, undressed in the hallway down to his underwear, put on slippers, took 2 knives, went into the bathroom and did everything alone. Her role, she said, was only to bring a bowl and prepare bags. She insisted she didn't commit the act. She only helped afterward. Yakov, meanwhile, claimed he wasn't home at all. He said when he left, his daughter was still alive. He said he was at work, and company surveillance cameras confirmed he stayed there until night. Anastasia responded by saying he could have exited through an area without cameras and staged his alibi. Experts believe the baby died sometime between 4 and 7 p.m., but the exact time couldn't be determined. Yakov did leave the apartment that day, but at 5 p.m., which according to the prosecutor was after the crime had already occurred. The case, which shocked nearly everyone, went to court in April 2024. At that point, viewers were asked, "What punishment do you think these people deserve?" Anastasia's lawyers claimed she wasn't in control of herself because banned substances were found in her blood, though in very small amounts. Yakov's lawyers initially tried the same defense, but no substances were found in his blood, so they changed strategy. They argued that Yakov's DNA was not found on the meat grinder or knives, only Anastasia's. They again emphasized that the exact time of death wasn't established and that Yakov left at 5 p.m., meaning his involvement couldn't be proven. The prosecutor requested 20 years for Yakov and 20 years for Anastasia. In court, the jury was shown the electric meat grinder, the bowl with remains, knives, scissors, and other tools. Even Yakov's slippers were presented as evidence due to bloodstains, though it couldn't be determined whose blood it was. When the defendants described the details of that night, some jurors broke down in tears. The judge questioned Anastasia sharply, pointing out, "You don't remember the time, but you remember exactly what your husband and child were wearing. That sounds like selective memory." Experts explained the cause of death clearly. Because the baby's larynx was intact, they could identify signs of strangulation. Pressure had been applied to the neck by hands, a rope, or another solid object. The swelling and hemorrhaging could only have occurred while the child was alive. They also ruled out head trauma, which both parents initially claimed. Examination of the skull showed no injuries consistent with such a blow. Finally, on October 2, 2024, the jury unanimously found both parents guilty. Sentence: Yakov Moyborodov, 15 years in a strict regime colony. Anastasia Cherednichenko, 13 years with forced labor. Yakov's mother still insists her son is innocent. She says she can't believe he could do something like this. She blames her daughter-in-law. She says, "My son is not guilty. He called child services. He called the local police. He documented bruises. He called doctors. He would never hurt his child. He didn't just love her, he adored her. Yakov's lawyers continue to file appeals. Anastasia did not appeal. She said the verdict was fair. And finally, on January 29, 2025, the Third Court of Appeal in Sochi ruled there were no grounds to change the sentence. Yakov's conviction remained unchanged. Friends, we've reached the end of this case. Until the next video, take care of yourselves and each other.